is Polyphonic Press, the podcast where two music fans pick a classic album completely at random. Using the patented random album generator, they are given an album to review from a curated list of over 1,000 classic releases, spanning multiple genres. And now onto the show. Here are your hosts, Jeremy Boyd and John Van Dyke.
All right, hey, welcome to Polyphonic Press. I'm Jeremy Boyd.
And I'm John Van Dyke.
And let's not waste any time. We've got the patented random album generator right in front of us here. So let's hit the button and see what album we're going to be listening to this week. And the album we're going to be listening to is Buffalo Springfield Again.
So this is probably like their second album.
I think so. Here. I thought they only had one album, but
Buffalo Springfield? Oh,
yeah.
I'm sure they've got a few.
Because they weren't around for too long, but
No, but they were around for basically the late 60s. I think they split up around 69 or something like that.
yeah. Okay, so this is their second album. So this is what it says on allmusic.com. Due in part to personnel problems, which saw Bruce Palmer and Neil Young in and out of the group, Buffalo Springfield's second album did not have as unified an approach as their debut. Yet it doesn't suffer from that in the least. Indeed, the group continued to make major strides in both their songwriting and arranging, and this record stands as their greatest triumph. Stephen Still's Bluebird and Rock and Roll Woman were masterful folk rockers that should have been big hits, although they did manage to become small ones. His lesser-known contributions, Hung Upside Down and the jazz-flavored Everydays, were also first-rate. Young contributed the Rolling Stones-derived Mr. Soul, as well as the brilliant Expecting to Fly and Broken Arrow, both of which employed lush psychedelic textures and brooding, surrealistic lyrics that stretched rock conventions to their breaking point. Richie Furay, who had not written any of the songs on the debut, takes tentative songwriting steps with 3 compositions, although only A Child's Claim to Fame with its memorable dobro hooks by James Burton meets the standards for the material by Stills and Young. The cut also anticipates the country rock direction of Furay's post-Springfield band Poco, although a slightly uneven record that did not feature the entire band on several cuts. The high points were so high and plentiful that its classic status cannot be denied.
All right. Sounds like some of their biggest songs are on this album.
Yeah.
And some classic Neil Young pen stuff, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Like Broken Arrow.
And Mr. Soul.
Yep.
Okay, so this album was released on October 30th, 1967. Genres are folk rock, psychedelic, country rock, and hard rock. Released on Atco Records and produced by Stephen Stills, Neil Young, Richie Furay, Dewey Martin, Jim Messina, Jack Nitzsky, Ahmet Ertegun, Brian Stone, and Charles Green.
That's a lot of producers.
Yeah. I think each producer maybe produced one track or something like that.
I think that's probably it.
Yeah.
Which can either be a disaster or brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, it could be a case of too many cooks, but we'll see. We'll see how it all comes together. So there's 10 songs on the album. And it's split evenly 5 and 5. So if you're listening along, which we encouraged you to do, I've linked the album in the show notes for both Spotify and Apple Music, so you can get it on your preferred medium. And so we encourage you to listen along. So here we go. Here is the first song on the album, and it's Mr. Soul. So here we go. All right, and ending the first side of the album with Bluebird. This is I would describe this as, you know how you get like Lindt chocolate or like a box of chocolates and it's like a sampler pack of a whole bunch of different flavors?
Okay, yeah.
That's how I would describe this, as like a variation of styles of music that were popular in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's like the rockin' first song, Mr. Soul, and then there was like a country folk song, and Bluebird was like a folk sort of psychedelic tune. Expecting to Fly was very psychedelic and atmospheric. It's sort of a cross section of everything. It's sort of like the quintessential 60s album so far. That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, but it's working as an album.
Oh, absolutely.
Despite the fact that it seems like everybody sort of brought their own stuff to the front, as opposed to actually composing it together as an album. It seems like each member had like their own thing to do.
Yeah.
Kind of like what Sloan does sometimes.
Yeah, that's actually, now that you mention it, yeah. Because you've got, well, in this case, 3 songwriters. You got Stephen Stills, Neil Young, and Richie Furay. And each one has their own style, but it all sort of works together. Yeah, this really is done like a Sloan album, isn't it?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so far I know a lot of the songs in this one, and like I'm familiar with Every Days, mostly from Yes covered it on what album was it? I think it's their second album. Yes covered it. It's a really good song. Bluebird, first time I heard that was by the James Gang, actually. They did it on their first album with Joe Walsh, and so he was with the band at that time. Those are really good versions of those songs. The only one I don't think I was really that familiar with was A Child's Claim to Fame. Yeah,
I wasn't familiar with that at all either. But yeah, it was a good song as well. Actually, it's funny. The first time I heard Mr. Soul was actually Neil Young re-recorded it for that electronic album that he did in the 80s, trying to get out of his contract with Geffen Records. Basically, if you don't know that story, basically in, I think, the early 80s, Neil Young signed with Geffen and he wasn't happy with the contract. So he was under contractual obligation to deliver some albums. And he basically he put out like a 50s doo-wop album, like a country album, and like an electronic experimental album. And I don't know if there was a lawsuit or something, but I think there was a lawsuit where the record company said, you're not putting out
Neil Young stuff,
Neil Young albums. And his argument was, well, I am Neil Young and whatever I put out is a Neil Young album. But he was really just not happy with the contract and just wanted to
get out of it
by putting out whatever, and not really putting much thought into his albums.
Of course, being an artist, the stuff he put out was actually kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I can think of a few times that happened. The one time I think I heard of a contractual obligation album gone completely awry was probably
Van Morrison.
Yeah. And his, what was it, 30 songs, if you can even call them songs.
Yeah. He's just a guitar and just like
he's strumming an out of tune guitar and just riffing about.
He's like describing things in the room and like
yeah. Ringworm.
Yeah, ringworm. That's one. Yeah.
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 I mean, it's a complete asshole move, but hilarious. I think Neil Young has a little more tact than that. Back to Buffalo Springfield.
Well, I was just reading about this album, and apparently it took a really long time to record. It's saying that they started recording in January of 1967 and didn't wrap up until September. And it came out October 30th. And apparently it says several factors may have contributed to the slow pace of the recording sessions, including that bassist Bruce Palmer. So this is actually interesting. I didn't know this. Neil Young, Bruce Palmer, and the drummer Dewey Martin are all Canadian. And So it says several factors may have contributed to the slow pace of the recording sessions, including that bassist Bruce Palmer had been deported in January and had re-entered the United States illegally to continue working with the band, and guitarist Neil Young had quit and rejoined the group on several occasions, notably absent for the band's appearance at the famed Monterey Pop Festival, where David Crosby substituted in his place at the request of guitarist Stephen Stills. So yeah, it's actually kind of surprising that Neil Young later joined Crosby, Stills, and Nash, because he and Stephen Stills didn't exactly get along in Buffalo Springfield.
I think they got along a little bit better than he and Dave Crosby did. I know David Crosby and Neil Young clashed like oil and water. They just did not mix.
Yeah. But yeah, apparently there was some rub between Stills and Young here. So it's surprising that Neil would agree to join another band with him. So yeah, there was some, I guess Neil Young, if you know anything about it, he does whatever he wants basically. And like, he'll make an album with Crazy Horse and he'll do an acoustic album, and he just, whatever he feels like doing in that moment, he does. And so like, yeah, so there was that reason that it took so long to record this. And so it's actually a kind of a miracle that this album got made at all, because there's lots of musicians playing on this, a lot of like session players that like people you would know, like there's with Jim Gordon and Hal Blaine on drums on some of the songs. Yeah, Jim Fielder on bass on one of the songs. So they kind of, and it was saying in the description, like not the whole band was there for every song. So yeah, it's actually it's amazing that the album got made at all, really.
Yeah, and that it's as good as it is.
Yeah, really.
It could easily have turned out to be a disaster with like, you know, sounding like things are missing or something like that, but it's not that way at all. Sometimes, actually, I think more work can get done when you only have a few members of the band in the studio, especially if there's like beefs going on between people. And then if that person's not there, it's just like, well, okay, Stephen Stills can fuck off for a little while Neil Young gets his shit done. And Neil Young and Bruce Palmer and whoever, you know, he gets along with that day can concentrate on actually getting this piece of music done without the interference of somebody else, for whatever reason. Nothing against Stephen Stills, though.
No, nothing against any of them. Just sometimes there's conflict.
Yeah, exactly.
It is like we've said this before, but it is one of the hardest things to keep a band together, because there's scheduling and everybody's got their own life and fighting and whatever. So on that happy note, let's get to the second half of the album, and it starts off with the song Hung Upside Down. So here we go. All right, ending the album with Broken Arrow. Yeah, that was an unusual song, but fitting for the album. It's sort of a psychedelic journey.
Yeah. I've always liked Broken Arrow. I thought it was I think it's a pretty cool song.
Yeah.
But yeah, this side is a more unfamiliar territory for me than the first side was. Whereas I knew like vast majority of the first side. I think I only knew really the one song on the second side. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but the second side, I mean, it had
good stuff,
all good stuff too. Yeah, Sad Memory, I really liked that. It was just it was a very sad song about a relationship breaking up. But I really I could feel the emotion behind it. Just that's Richie Furay singing that one. And Hung Upside Down was another good rock song. Yeah, Good Time Boy as well. I mean, these are all really good songs that I never like. It's not that I didn't know there was this much to Buffalo Springfield. I thought it was just the one album for some reason. And now I'm remembering, oh yeah, there's Mr. Soul. But I thought it was on that album. Yeah, no, this is really, really good stuff.
Yeah, the one song that I thought stood apart from the other ones, and it almost felt like it didn't belong, but that was only because it sounded like something Wilson Pickett would do, was Good Time Boy. It sounded very, like Motown soul sort of stuff.
Yeah, and that's Stephen Stills. He's got a really good rock and roll voice. He doesn't bring it out that much, but he's got that really sort of raspy sort of growl to his voice that he can do. Really, yeah, his vocals on that were really just you feel the energy. It's kind of a shame that they broke up after this album, or I think they put out another one I was reading, but it's kind of a shame that the band didn't last as long, but otherwise we wouldn't have gotten, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Neil Young's career and Stephen Stills and all that good stuff. So I guess this is a good stepping stone for them. But this is a really good album. And I think it's, like I said, it is kind of sort of a sample pack of all this, even the R&B stuff, like a sample pack of all the sounds of the 60s, basically. Yeah. This band definitely covered a lot of ground in their sound, more so than I realized as well. I mean, I always knew that they did the country rock stuff, and they did the more psychedelic rock stuff and harder stuff sometimes as well. I mean, I knew they did a lot of that, but I didn't know that they dabbled that much into like all the other stuff as well. Yeah. It was just not as well known. Yeah. I had no idea how versatile the band is. Yeah. But in those days you had to be, a lot of the time, like a lot of the bands that Neil Young and Stephen Stills started out with, and the other guys, like Neil was in the Minor Birds in a band called the Squires, and those were bands that were hired to play like parties and clubs, whereas now you would hire a DJ, but back then you would hire a band and they would play like a lot of the stuff that would be on the radio. So like a lot of R&B and whatever was popular at the time. So you kind of had to adapt to whatever was going on. And a lot of bands, like there's that Malcolm Gladwell that talks about the 10,000 hours to master something. And a lot of the bands did that through playing all these different genres and playing in the clubs. I mean, the Beatles, they got their 10,000 hours playing in Hamburg and the Cavern. That's why they became so good as a band. And but they certainly weren't the only ones, because that's just how it was back then. Like you said, like Buffalo Springfield, it was mostly made up of Neil Young's band. Was it the Minor Birds or the Squires? And so they were all used to playing together. So you had the core of that band, and Stephen Stills coming in and writing some songs, and Richie Furay, and just like basically like, okay, we're recording an album. Everybody's writing in these different styles. Well, we can play the different styles. And yeah, that's just how it was back then. And it's not surprising that they're kind of pulling all of their influences on this album. Yeah. No, it's very interesting. And I kind of want to hear the first album all the way through as well. Which I don't believe I've got. I've heard all the hits and stuff like that, but I don't think I've actually sat and listened to one of the albums all the way through.
because I don't know. Sometimes they're hard to find. I'm glad they're up on these streaming services. I mean, I mean, we could get into the politics of that, but I won't do that right now. But yeah, ultimately, I'm glad they're here, so I can actually listen to the whole thing and discover hidden gems and stuff like that I was unfamiliar with before.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I know the answer, but gotta ask anyway. Would you listen to this again?
Oh yeah,
me too.
Yes, this is a very definite yes.
That's an easy one. This is
even if it didn't go together as an album. I mean, all the songs are just worth a listen to.
Yeah,
there's nothing here that's bad or anything like that. It's all very cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Even Broken Arrow, I wasn't sure about. I wasn't sure where it was going. It was like, okay, this is kind of strange. I don't know.
The first time you heard Broken Arrow?
Yeah. It's like, okay, not sure about this, but it grew on me because, okay, I see what's going on. They're breaking up the verses with these interludes. Yeah. So, yeah.
I've always loved that song.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to cover the song, you wouldn't need to put in all the interludes and stuff like that, but it definitely works as sort of like a cinematic piece.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider supporting us in a few ways. You can subscribe on whatever platform you're on, either Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening. Your ratings and reviews really help us to grow and improve. And you can share this episode with your friends on social media, and that helps us reach new listeners as well. And lastly, if you'd like to support us on Patreon, you can do that. There's lots of cool perks there. This podcast will always be free, but if you feel inclined to help us out that way, we're more than welcome to. And your support keeps us going and helping us make more content in the future. And I think that just about does it. I'm Jeremy Boyd.
I'm John Van Dyke.
Take it easy.